Thank you.
The gentleman from Kansas, Mr. LaTurner, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Today, the Oversight Committee is convening to talk about abortion for the third time this year. We could be conducting government oversight on the actions this administration has taken that have shattered our economy. Constituents in my district are shifting money away from their monthly grocery bill to pay their rent and utility bills. People in lower income communities are effectively choosing between eating and living in their homes as runaway inflation continues to impact everyday lives. We could be conducting oversight on this administration's energy policies and its agencies' rulemaking that has hindered domestic oil and gas production, compromising our national security in the midst of a global conflict where energy is the key bargaining chip. Or we could conduct oversight on the policies that led to the current border crisis and the ensuing fentanyl crisis. Last year, our nation recorded the most overdose deaths in its history. Only a couple months ago, I talked to law enforcement officers in my district who are trying to outpace the massive amounts of fentanyl flooding into Midwestern communities, over 80% of which comes into our country via the southern border. Sellers of this drug are lacing it into other drugs, designing it to look like candy and targeting children as potential buyers through social media and messaging apps. But this committee is holding a hearing about abortion. Just 2 months ago, after a previous hearing on abortion, the Supreme Court's June decision on Dobbs sparked important conversations, but it also gave rise to rampant misinformation and fear-mongering propagated by Democrats. I'd like to use the remainder of my time today to gain clarity around some questions on women's health and expose some untruths coming from the other side of the aisle. Dr. Wubbenhorst, one assertion we've heard in the wake of the Dobbs decision is that abortion access is a fundamental component of women's health outcomes. We hear that restricted access to abortion disproportionately affects minority women and poorer communities where women already struggle with accessing health services. But even abortion advocates won't refute that abortive procedures come with some risks and potential carryover effects on future pregnancies. In fact, in Finland, where the maternal mortality rate is significantly lower, the risk of death from legal induced abortions is 4 times greater than the risk of death from childbirth. In the United States, the death rate from abortion is double the death rate from natural childbirth. Based on your experience, is abortion a positive contributor to women's health outcomes?
No, abortion is not a positive contributor to women's outcomes, and it is especially not a positive contributor to the outcome of Black women. Black women disproportionately undergo abortions. Black women disproportionately undergo mid-trimester abortions, which are inherently riskier. The death rate, not the complication rate, for abortion for Black women is 2 to 3 times that of other women. And in my opinion, my clinical opinion, one of the great burdens that we don't talk about at all is the crisis, the epidemic of preterm birth in African-American women. African-American women, as I've noted, have higher rates of abortion, and abortion is causally associated with the risk for preterm birth, especially abortions that are performed at later gestational ages.
How do you respond when people argue that abortions are safer than the childbirth?
I think that that particular question rests on a series of flawed papers by Dr. Grimes et al. I knew Dr. Grimes when he was at the University of North Carolina, and with all due respect, those papers conflate denominators, they use different data sources which are not compatible, and they arrive at a conclusion which really is not tenable based on the data. In spite of that, these particular statistics and that particular claim has been relentlessly echoed over and over again when there is absolutely no basis for it. And in countries, as you mentioned, Finland, which I think is an excellent example, countries where we have complete ascertainment of maternal mortality, complete ascertainment of abortion-related mortality, we can see that that is not the case. Our abortion statistics in the United States are flawed. Our maternal mortality statistics are flawed as well. So therefore, we cannot come to any reasonable conclusions except by extrapolation. I mentioned the Barrett study earlier from 2004 that showed a 38% exponential increase in risk for death from abortion with every gestational, every week of gestational age, but we simply don't have the data to come to that kind of conclusion.
And why is that? Why don't we have more data on maternal mortality and the adverse health effects relating to abortion?
I think collection of data on maternal mortality is necessarily somewhat complex. If you look at the latest statistics, which came out last week from CDC, they show some very interesting trends. One is that you tend to have you have deaths in early pregnancy, presumably from things like ectopic pregnancy, and then, of course, deaths around and after postpartum. But the problem is that some women die in pregnancy, but not from pregnancy-related causes. And that's actually a substantial number of women. And so I think that we really need to push for both better abortion mortality collection, better basic data collection on how many abortions we have in the United States, and maternal mortality data collection.
Gentlewoman's
Thank you,
time
Madam
has
Chairwoman.
expired.